dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. I did take last week off for Memorial Day, but glad to be back today. Let's talk about the Dems, Democrat Party for 2020. It is impeachment or bust. We've had a bunch of nonsense going on. Now that the Mueller report, the investigation is over and the report has been filed, not only has it been filed, it's been released to the public. And it is so unsatisfactory to the Democrat Party that Mr. Mueller decided to come out and speak about it, but only in limited parts. Here's the interesting thing. On the 29th of May, he came out and gave a 10-minute statement, didn't take any questions, and did everything he could to say, the report is the report, leave me alone. Let's start with part of his opening statement from his remarks.
Thank you for being here. 2 years ago, the acting Attorney General asked me to serve as special counsel, and he created the special counsel's office. The appointment order directed the office to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. This included investigating any links or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. Now, I have not spoken publicly during our investigation. I'm speaking out today because our investigation is complete. The Attorney General has made the report on our investigation largely public. We are formally closing the special counsel's office, and as well, I'm resigning from the Department of Justice to return to private life.
Translation, I'm done. I gave you guys 2 years. I went through all this stuff. I wrote a report. I put it out there. It's now in the public arena, and I am resigning. I am done. I don't have any other way and that's in the first minute or so of his remarks, to say that I'm done. The report's done. The investigation's done. I'm retiring. Now, the next clip I have starts to sharpen that point just a little bit. If you just follow this is very short.
I'll make a few remarks about the results of our work. But beyond these few remarks, it is important that the office's written work speak for itself.
Translation, read the report. I'm done. Read the report. It keeps going. So now he's going to talk a little bit about what he found during his investigation, or what his team found during their investigation.
Let me begin where the appointment order begins, and that is interference in the 2016 presidential election. As alleged by the grand jury in an indictment, Russian intelligence officers who were part of the Russian military launched a concerted attack on our political system. The indictment alleges that they used sophisticated cyber techniques to hack into computers and networks used by the Clinton campaign. They stole private information and then released that information through fake online identities and through the organization WikiLeaks. The releases were designed and timed to interfere with our election and to damage a presidential candidate. And at the same time, as the grand jury alleged in a separate indictment, a private Russian entity engaged in a social media operation where Russian citizens posed as Americans in order to influence an election.
Okay. Russians did some stuff. Wasn't straight what they did. They did try to interfere. You had Russian military, you had Russian private citizens, all of them out to quote unquote influence the election. Now the first thing is this: did they? I mean, let's remember Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Well, if the Russians were influencing the election, how'd that happen? Well, but you think the Russians can influence the Electoral College? Wow. Okay, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And the fact that there is an Electoral College and the way presidents are elected testifies to this day of the genius of the 18th century founders of the American Republic. Nevertheless. Now, here's another interesting thing here, because as he's talking about the allegations against the Russians, he slides this little clip in, which should be old hat to anyone who's really an American at heart.
These indictments contain allegations, and we are not commenting on the guilt or the innocence of any specific defendant. Every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
I want you to remember that he said that, because he's basically saying that Russians, even though we have evidence on them, we got them dead to rights. We have them. We have proof. We have documentation. We have all kinds of things on them, but they are innocent until proven guilty. Now the question is going to come up later: does he give that same blanket immunity, for lack of a better term, or due process consideration to everyone else? Now, let's go to the primary thing that he said was the reason for his investigation. And what did he find?
The report has two parts, addressing the two main issues we were asked to investigate. The first volume of the report details numerous efforts emanating from Russia to influence the election. This volume includes a discussion of the Trump campaign's response to this activity, as well as our conclusion that there was insufficient evidence to charge a broader conspiracy.
See, that's that Democrat appeasement weak sauce that I keep referring to. Now, that's not what his report says. And back on the 18th of April, Attorney General Barr, when he released a 4-page summary of the Mueller report and then had a press conference about that, had this to say about the collusion issue as a result of the report.
Special counsel investigated a number of links or contacts between the Trump campaign officials and individuals connected with the Russian government during the 2016 presidential campaign. After reviewing these contacts, the special counsel did not find any conspiracy to violate U.S. law involving Russian-linked persons and any persons associated with the Trump campaign. So that's the bottom line. After nearly 2 years of investigation, thousands of subpoenas, hundreds of warrants, and witness interviews, the special counsel confirmed that the Russian government sponsored efforts to illegally interfere with the 2016 presidential election, but did not find that the Trump campaign or other Americans colluded in those efforts.
And if you actually read the Mueller report, it lines up more directly with what Attorney General Barr said. There's nothing to indicate that any American had anything to do with the Russians' efforts to influence the 2016 campaign. So what are we talking about here? No Americans were involved. Hillary won the popular vote, and there's nothing that they could do really to affect the Electoral College. So what was all this about? I digress. Oh, about the on the issue of obstruction, which is the other thing that now everybody's hung on to since they know they can't get Trump on collusion because there was none.
And in the second volume, the report describes the results and analysis of our obstruction of justice investigation involving the president. And we conducted that investigation, and we kept the office of the acting attorney general apprised of the progress of our work. And as set forth in the report, after that investigation, if we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. We did not, however, make a determination as to whether the president did commit a crime.
All right, let me get this straight. Before you said you had Russians dead to rights, but that they were innocent until proven guilty. But you had evidence that they had committed a crime. And you concluded that they committed a crime. But they're not guilty of that crime until they are tried. You could not conclude whether or not Donald Trump committed any crime, but you're not saying that he's innocent. Wow. Isn't that interesting? I love the duplicitous nature of all of these people who are supposed to be trusted by the American people. Robert Mueller's a hack. He just gave himself away. The Russians are innocent, but the President of the United States cannot be. Wow. Okay. Now, I have evidence against the Russians. I don't have evidence against the president. Now, he went on into this thing about a memo, whether or not you can charge a sitting president. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, all that to say what? Either the evidence is there or it is not. And when you say you could not reach a conclusion, what's the difference between that and a bang-bang play at first base in baseball? Tie goes to the runner. Either you got it or you don't. If you're not sure that you got it, the guy walks. Because you have to be able to prove that something went awry. And there's obviously exculpatory evidence. Let me back up on this. Donald Trump allowed this thing to go on for 2 years. He could have stopped it at any time. He could have stopped it at any time. He could have directed the DOJ to stop the investigation. He could have fired Rosenstein. He could have done that. He waited until after the 2018 election to get rid of Jeff Sessions. If he wanted to obstruct this thing, if he was trying to obstruct this thing, it would have never gotten to a report. You got your report, and you got nothing. You got air. You got bupkis. But we're still pressing on with this thing. I find that fascinating. So now the interesting thing is next clip, he didn't want the American people to see the whole report. He wanted to just, okay, well, let them see this, but he didn't want them to see other things. That, speaking of Mueller, really.
We conducted an independent criminal investigation and reported the results to the Attorney General, as required by department regulations. The Attorney General then concluded that it was appropriate to provide our report to Congress and to the American people. At one point in time, I requested that certain portions of the report be released. The Attorney General preferred to make the entire report public all at once, and we appreciate that the Attorney General made the report largely public, and I certainly do not question the Attorney General's good faith in that decision.
How could there be bad faith in a decision to make a report of this nature public knowledge? Are you saying that people do not have a right to know? You spent all their money for 2 years. You did all this work. You disrupted people's lives. You imprisoned them. You're indicting people that you'll never try. The Russians, by the way. You're doing all this in their name, And you did not want them to see the full report? And it's the good faith of the Attorney General that might be in question? I don't think so. You, on the other hand, okay. Last clip from Mueller, as he was winding up this about 10-minute or so presentation, which involved no questions from the media, which I found interesting. This is kind of his parting shot.
Now, I hope and expect this to be the only time that I will speak to you in this manner. I am making that decision myself. No one has told me whether I can or should testify or speak further about this matter. There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report. It contains our findings and analysis and the reasons for the decisions we made. We chose those words carefully, and the work speaks for itself. And the report is my testimony. I would not provide information beyond that which is already public in any appearance before Congress.
Okay, Nancy, don't come for me. Mr. Adler, don't call me. I got nothing to say. Anything that you believe that I would say is already written in the report. So if you can read, then you have everything you need. I'm not interested in any more of the drama. It didn't get where we all thought it was going to go. What little integrity I had brought me to the conclusion that I can't get the guy for what he didn't do, and I can't prove it at all. So you shot your load, and there's nothing there. I'm done. I told you at the outset, I'm done. I'm retiring. I've written this report. I'm throwing it out there. It's out there in the public. There's nothing more for me. I don't want to talk to you guys. I don't want to be before Congress. I don't want anything. I'm out. Now, is that going to deter the Democrats? Probably not. Because a week before he had his press conference, Nancy Pelosi, on her way to the now infamous meeting, infrastructure follow-up meeting, her and Chuck Schumer on their way to the White House to talk about infrastructure, she dropped this little bomb that made sure there was never going to be any infrastructure meeting, anything else. And she knew what she was doing because Nancy Pelosi is a lowlife. She is scum. I bristle at the attempt to call Nancy Pelosi intelligent, saying she's a smart woman. Nancy, I don't like to accuse people of intelligence without evidence. And the only evidence that I have of Nancy Pelosi is that she's a cunning woman. Cunning is not the same as intelligent. It's a big difference. You can look them up in the dictionary. There's two different words. She is cunning. And what she is trying to do is save herself. She can't turn off the liberals, the progressives, the radical progressives in her party. She can't turn them off without risking being challenged for her speakership, the same way John Boehner was run out of there. She doesn't want to be Boehner or Boehnerd. At the same time, she knows that there's no there with impeachment. But now bear this in mind. Impeachment, if it even occurs, almost guarantees a re-election for Trump. The calculus is whether or not it keeps the Democrats in control of the House. But no matter what, it keeps Nancy Pelosi at the head of the Democrat caucus. That's what this is all about. Anyway, she made these statements back on the 22nd of May, a week before Mueller's statement, on her way to the White House to meet with Trump.
So there were three current, within the last 72 hours, examples of progress that were made to get the truth and the facts for the American people. We had other presentation from Richie Neal about what's happening on the taxing. It's very clear. It is the law of the land. It is very clear. It is the law of the land. And then, of course, Jerry Nadler spoke in the beginning to give us a context for all of this. Excuse me. Right now, the Judiciary Committee is marking up the DREAM Act. We do have our legislative agenda that we're moving forward on. It was a very positive meeting, a respectful sharing of ideas, and I think a very impressive presentation by our chairs. We do believe that it's important to follow the facts. We believe that no one is above the law, including the President of the United States, and we believe that the President of the United States is engaged in a cover-up, and that was the nature of the meeting.
Nancy Pelosi put that out there on her way to the White House. Okay, I'm going to go meet with Trump on infrastructure. By the way, he's guilty of a cover-up. And we thought what was going to come from that meeting? Yeah, okay, never mind. Guys, let's make sure we understand this. The Democrats have nothing for 2020. Their Clownso nomination process continues. Biden's out there feeling up little girls and throwing them into the press corps, which I thought was ridiculous. Kamala Harris is getting pimped at her own rallies by guys coming up and just grabbing the mic. Wow. Buttigieg they keep trying, because he is homosexual, they keep trying to push Pete Buttigieg. Oh, he's smart and he's just that. If he were not homosexual, he would not be registering. He would not be getting the attention. Understand this. If he were Republican, he'd be dead, because Republicans aren't necessarily trying to hear from homosexuals. They're not going to shut them down just because, but you're not going to get any rhythm just because you're a homosexual. And Pete Buttigieg, well, he's a veteran. So are a whole lot of heterosexuals. So are a whole lot of people who actually believe things that are more in line with the American people. Pete Buttigieg does not. If he were not homosexual, you wouldn't be hearing from him at all. And the idea that, Kamala Harris got pimped and, this shouldn't happen. It happened to Bernie Sanders last go around. Black Lives Matter walked up there and just pushed him off the doggone, just kicked him to the curb and took over his event. This isn't new. This is how Democrat Party operates. And let's be clear, there are no popular policy prescriptions. There's no legislative agenda in the Democrat Party that resonates with the American people. The American people are not up on abortion. They're not feeling the love on abortion the way Democrats do. It's not happening. If that were the case, you wouldn't have had the case where they're fighting over whether or not the single only remaining abortion clinic in the state of Missouri was going to remain open. If abortion was as popular as Democrats think it is, how come there's only one clinic in all of Missouri? And there are plenty of states where the number is far less than 10. Abortion has lost in every place but the courts. And that's getting ready to change. And in the Democrat Party, the left wing of the Democrat Party, where it's never going to go away. Immigration, they've lost the argument on immigration. They don't have an argument on immigration. As people are seeing the results of Democrat Party inaction and Democrat Party perspective on immigration, they have no prescriptions. And no, they don't see, there's nothing coming from them from a legislative perspective to address immigration. On trade or the economy, the Democrats, please. Never going to do anything on trade or the economy. Well, the trade war with China, which has basically resulted in their dropping tariffs not only with the United States but across other trading partners as well. That's a war? I don't think so. China's not treating it like a war. The U.S. isn't treating it like a war. They're treating it like a negotiation. And if it were really hurting the American economy, what's GDP again? What's unemployment in the United States again? Well, what about the soybean farmers? What about them? Well, they're getting hurt. You know what? More people than... So where were you when people other than soybean farmers were getting hurt over decades of China dumping products in the United States and elsewhere and otherwise sucking up our production capacity and making it their own? Where were you on that? Don't get me wrong. I don't want to see soybean farmers hurt. But I'd rather see the U.S. economy expand at almost any cost. And I'd rather see fairer treatment of U.S. products and businesses at almost any cost. So what about health insurance? I haven't heard anything from the Democrats on health insurance except what they don't like that they think President Trump is doing. That's all I hear. They have no agenda for 2020. They have no winning formula for 2020. It is down to impeachment and a repeat of the voter and election fraud that happened in 2016. Now, how do you think Hillary Clinton won the popular vote? And the election fraud that you saw in 2018. One of no Republican representatives in Orange County, California, when it is one of the strongest Republican areas in the state, and the voters of that county chose the Republican candidate for governor who got waxed statewide. So what you're trying to tell me is that the Republicans in Orange County voted for a losing gubernatorial candidate and then switched parties downstream. Come on. Nobody's believing that. The Democrat Party has impeachment and voter/election fraud. That is the only thing that is keeping them nationally viable. If the people of the United States stand up to that and do not allow voter and election fraud to continue into 2020 the way it has in the last two election cycles, the Democrat Party becomes like the Green Party. They become nobodies. Their anti-Semitism, their infanticide, their anti-Americanism with regard to the economy, with regard to unemployment, with regard to immigration, all of that makes them marginalized. That's what this whole thing comes down to. So for the Democrats in 2020, it's impeachment or bust. And the smart money would say that they might get both, because I don't think impeachment's going to help them, and I don't think they can win in 2020. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, President Trump has now combined trade and immigration in a way that we haven't seen, at least in the past 2-3 more decades. He's acknowledging a link. But before we get to that, let's talk first about the immigration part. On the 30th of May, a video from the border was widely circulated by the White House, and here's how MSNBC reported on that particular video.
Now to an exclusive NBC News report. U.S. Border Patrol agents apprehended a group of more than 1,000 migrants who illegally crossed the southern border near El Paso, Texas. It's believed to be the largest single group intercepted by the Border Patrol. NBC News' Julia Ainsley has the exclusive details. Julia, what can you tell us about what's going on?
Well, you're right, Jeff. This is the largest group that Border Patrol has encountered, and the last record was over 400 set last month. They are seeing larger groups coming. It's part of a trend. Immigration advocates say that these immigrants feel safety in numbers. They want to come in a large group because of how dangerous it can be to cross through these areas. More immigrants are coming in illegally. Some of the advocates say that's because it is harder to come in legally. It's taking longer to get in when you want to claim asylum at legal ports of entry. But what this means from a safety and humanitarian perspective is sometimes Border Patrol is not able to safely attend to these large groups. They don't have the medical personnel. Often these people are only patrolling the border in pairs. So you have two border agents encountering a group of over 1,000 in this case. And we know the majority of them, over 900, traveled as part of a family. That means if you encounter a mother and child, those would count as two family units. That's the way they count this. So we're seeing more families, again, part of a growing trend, as families come here to claim asylum, fleeing violence and poverty in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America.
Hey, Julia, the president mentioned a big immigration announcement coming today when he left the White House this morning. Do we know whether this is the announcement that he was talking about?
I'm told, Jeff, from a well-placed source, that this will be a large thrust of that announcement, that the president wants to show that there's a crisis at the border, to try to paint the picture of an invasion, and that this piece of information is something that he's been holding in order to make this a very dramatic rollout tomorrow. But, if that's the case, it's important to keep in mind that these are not people who come in armed or dangerous. Nothing in our information or the documents that we've seen indicate that they pose any kind of threat to the border agents, but just that their sheer numbers do present problems not only just for border agents but for themselves, and that they can't be safely attended to. But yes, I think we should keep our ears out for this same number, 1,036, tomorrow when the president speaks.
NBC's Julia Ainsley with that exclusive reporting. Julia, thank you.
You may remember when Donald Trump took office, we saw a precipitous drop in the number of illegal immigrant crossings. And that was because the American people had spoken, and Donald Trump had given them certain assurances, to which they responded, that something was finally going to be done about illegal immigration. The president has done his best to keep his word, but what has been communicated since that election and since the initial precipitous drop is the Congress of the United States, both Republican and Democrat, have made it very clear that they have no appetite for doing anything to staunch the flow of illegal immigrants. And as a result, as that message has filtered south of the border and past the Mexican border down into Central America, they're seeing that, well, maybe we can do more than we have before. Now you're seeing record numbers. The last record was 400 plus last month. Now we're talking about a 150% increase over that to a new record this month. Yeah, we have a problem at the border. It is a crisis. And you're saying, well, it's not a humanitarian crisis. Okay, wait a minute. They're traveling in numbers because the journey is dangerous? Why isn't that a humanitarian crisis? Why are you coming on such a dangerous journey? And if it's so dangerous, why are you not stopping in Mexico? Why are you coming all the way here, risking everything? Why aren't you doing something a little bit closer to home? So that was the precursor to what we thought was going to happen. And then on the 30th of May, we had this.
There is now a statement from the White House. In fact, it's a statement from the president himself, a paper statement, that says he's going to impose new tariffs on all goods coming in from Mexico. He says they'll increase until the illegal immigration problem is resolved. And so, first of all, your thoughts on this. How is this going to affect this USMCA trade deal? And what are your thoughts about the use of tariffs here as this kind of retaliatory measure to try to force something to get done on immigration?
3 quick points. First and foremost, USMCA, or NAFTA 2.0, is by no means a done deal. Democrats are divided on this in the House of Representatives as to whether or not it can be ratified. Vice President Mike Pence was in Ottawa earlier on Thursday meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and he all but guaranteed that USMCA would be ratified. But again, the politics in the House of Representatives are very divided. Secondly, the president's going to run into the business community here, in particular a key constituency of his manufacturers. They do not like tariffs, particularly tariffs impacting Mexico. I mean, that trade, like hundreds of millions of dollars worth daily crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, it really directly impacts manufacturers. And thirdly, this is really the most aggressive step that we've seen coming from this White House in tying tariffs with immigration. And as you mentioned, this definitely impacts the USMCA forecast, which is something that the president would like to get ratified heading into 2020, but as of now is incredibly uncertain future.
So Donald Trump has said until this gets fixed, we're going to start putting a tariff on all goods coming from Mexico. We're going to go after your pocketbook. Well, that's not fair. That's going to hurt. It's really. Let me help you out with something. Back in the 1992 election, which was the last one we had before the NAFTA agreement, which the USMCA is looking to replace, was ratified and signed, that was actually a topic for the presidential debates. I want you to remember, and I'm going to play it for you, what H. Ross Perot, the spoiler in that election, had to say regarding NAFTA.
The candidates will have an opportunity to make a closing statement. So, President Bush, I think you said it earlier, let's get it on.
Let's go.
And I think the first question is over here.
Yes, I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Perot. What will you do as president to open foreign markets to fair competition from American business and to stop unfair competition here at home from foreign countries so that we can bring jobs back to the United States?
That's right at the top of my agenda. We've shipped millions of jobs overseas, and we have a strange situation because we have a process in Washington where after you've served for a while, you cash in, become a foreign lobbyist, make $30,000 a month, then take a leave, work on presidential campaigns, make sure you got good contacts, and then go back out. Now, if you just want to get down to brass tacks, first thing you ought to do is get all these folks who've got these one-way trade agreements that we've negotiated over the years and say, fellas, we'll take the same deal we gave you. And they'll gridlock right at that point because, for example, we've got international competitors who simply could not unload their cars off the ships if they had to comply. You see, if it was a two-way street, just couldn't do it. We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. To those of you in the audience who are business people, pretty simple. If you're paying $12, $13, $14 an hour for factory workers, and you can move your factory south of the border, pay $1 an hour for labor, hire a young 25, that's assuming you've been in business for a long time, you've got a mature workforce. Pay $1 an hour for your labor, have no health care, that's the most expensive single element, making a car, have no environmental controls, no pollution controls, and no retirement, and you don't care about anything but making money, there will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. One last point here. I decided I was dumb and didn't understand it, so I called the who's who of the folks who've been around it. And I said, why won't everybody go south? They said, we'll be disruptive. I said, for how long? I finally got them up for 12 to 15 years. And I said, well, how does it stop being disruptive? And that is when their jobs come up from $1 an hour to $6 an hour and ours go down to $6 an hour, then it's leveled again. But in the meantime, you've wrecked the country with these kinds of deals.
And there you have it. Donald Trump ran in 2016 saying that we had bad trade agreements, that they weren't two-way streets. He's been working with China to get a two-way street as opposed to one that's one way to the benefit of China. He's been working on the USMCA to do the same thing with Mexico and Canada. And so far, Mexico has been willing to go along with the negotiations. But the other thing is, he's trying to protect American jobs. How is he doing that? By trying to make the United States a preferred place to do business, to make it a better investment opportunity than other places. And listen to what Mr. Perot said at the end. How does this level off? It levels off when you ship so many jobs south or outside of the country that their wages come up while ours go down. And then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You've reached an equilibrium. Well, see, here's what happens. Another way to do that, instead of sending what would be higher paying jobs south of the border, is to bring lower paid workers north and have them compete in the same factories as the higher paid American workers for the same jobs, knowing that they will take less money. So it doesn't matter where you take less money than the Americans, whether or not you're on the southern side of the border, where it's a remarkable step up for you, or you're on the northern side of the border, where it's a remarkable step down for the American. Either way, whether you've moved the job, you've moved the money. Donald Trump now seems to understand that, and he's attacking those same two things that were brought up in the 1992 election. Why are you missing this? The giant sucking sound has been going on for a while. Why do you think that the AFL-CIO is on board with the USMCA and on board with trying to get rid of NAFTA? Because they know what it does. They know what it has done. And they know it's no good. They know that. But now what you're hearing is this is so terrible. No, it's not terrible. As a matter of fact, despite all the other people and experts going out and saying this is terrible for the country, this is terrible for the American worker, for American businesses, there is one, at least one, American politician, member of Congress actually, who doesn't see this as a Chicken Little situation if America imposes tariffs on Mexican goods.
So joining us now, Republican Arizona Congressman and House Judiciary Committee member, Congressman Andy Biggs. Congressman, let's talk tariffs, right? You have called them a drastic step, but you still support them?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's why. What's happening on the border is an absolute total national security crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. And a lot of these people that are pushing back on this where have they been? They have not been in there offering suggestions. They've not been down at the border looking at this. They've not been talking to the ranchers who live along the border. They haven't talked to the Border Patrol agents. And we're talking 1 million plus people we are going to apprehend and another 1 million coming in a year. This is amazing. And, we've been working with Mexico, taking the carrot approach with them, trying to get them to help out. They're letting people traverse their country. It is amazing what's going on. It's devastating what's going on to this country. And in some ways, it's an existential threat to the country.
But, Congressman, a lot of the people that are pushing back on these tariffs are your own Republican colleagues in Congress and the U.S. Chamber of Congress. They're warning of dire economic consequences. I want to show you what Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said. He said, that he supported most of the president's immigration policies, but not this one. He says, quote, "This is a misuse of presidential tariff authority and counter to congressional intent. Following through on this threat would seriously jeopardize passage of the USMCA. It's a trade agreement and a central campaign pledge of President Trump's and what could be a big victory for the country." So are you worried about the impact that this might have on the potential passage of that trade agreement?
I think that trade agreement is going to go through. I think they're going to work it out. Remember that NAFTA itself took a great deal of time and had over 400 side agreements. So this one's going to have a bunch of side agreements too. So they're working on that. But if this were not going to work to try to ameliorate the border issue that we have, then I would expect Mexico not to send an envoy immediately. They've already sent an envoy up to try to negotiate with this administration. They're going to be arriving next week. That tells me that they realize how important this is. And the President's basically said, look, we've worked with the carrot side. It's time to work with the stick side.
What would be your message to some of your constituents who may have businesses near the border who are worried that their businesses may suffer because of these tariffs?
I'm with them. I understand that, and they're right. But I would say that this is a long-term issue that we're trying to resolve, and hopefully we can get through this with as minimal pain for as short a period as possible. And I'm hoping that we can avert the actual imposition of the 5% tariff. But we've got to solve this border crisis because it is a severe crisis. And quite frankly, I think it's going to result in a resolution that will solve the problem, and that is good for the country, and that'll be good for the businesses in my district.
So your message is essentially short-term pain for long-term gain. Really quickly, exactly. I just want to ask you one question about the special counsel, Bob Mueller, after his big press conference this week. So much of his speech, the beginning and the end of it, so much of his remarks were focused on election interference, what happened in 2016 and what could happen in 2020. Do you believe Republicans are doing enough to keep that from happening again?
Well, I think we are. We're working on it, and we've had this. The president formed basically a national commission. He asked for information from all secretaries of state to try to resolve what we can do to prevent this kind of hacking into our election and try to prevent Russian interference and, frankly, other nations' interference, such as China, Iran, others who would try to cyber hack and to influence our election. So we're doing some. We have to do more. That's for sure. But I think that this administration is on top of it.
I think all Americans hope that Congress, the president, everybody in government will be doing more heading into 2020 to safeguard our elections. Right. Congressman Biggs, thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
Trump understands what's going on, and he's dealing with that situation. There is an issue with the border, and the thing is, it doesn't matter what type of trade agreement you have regarding goods if you don't stop the flow of people. If you don't control that, you will lose income for Americans another way. Importing lower paid workers as opposed to exporting higher paying jobs. The result is the same. Oh, and as for the report, the Mueller report talking about foreign entities, let's not forget that the biggest threat to U.S. elections comes from Democrats inside the country with voter fraud and election fraud. The question is whether or not the attorneys generals are going to tighten up their electoral processes, their election processes to protect against that in places like Broward County, Florida, in places like Orange County, California, in other places around the country. I don't know if they will or they won't. Back to the whole thing with immigration. You also notice that the Republican representative said Mexico's response to this seems to be different from that of the people in the United States. They're sending somebody up here to negotiate because they don't want this to happen. They want to get up here immediately and find out, what can we do? As a matter of fact, on June 1st, this was part of the remarks of the Mexican president to the imposition or the potential imposition of the trade tariffs.
All conflicts in bilateral relations must be faced and resolved through dialogue, through communication. The use of coercive measures does not lead to anything good. No. And we have to help so they do not enter the United States illegally, but we also have to do it respecting human rights.
Help me understand two things. One, he's acknowledging that Mexico has got to do something. How come everybody in America seems not to be on the same page? It seems like Mexico and Trump are closer to being in agreement than Trump and everybody else in the United States. Mexico and Trump are already saying, yeah, we got to talk about this because it's got to stop. The other thing that's interesting to me, well, we have to keep making it so they don't do it illegally, but respecting human rights. That's got nothing to do with America, because until they get to America, America's got nothing to do with their human rights. They spend most of their time getting to America going through Mexico. What is Mexico going to do to respect their human rights? Because they're being raped in Mexico. The coyotes are getting to them in Mexico and before. So what is Mexico doing to protect the sexual abuse, the rapes and the harassment and the beatings and things of that? That's happening in Mexico. It's got nothing to do with the United States. What is Mexico going to do about this situation? That's where all this comes. Mexico is now coming to the United States to talk about what they might do regarding illegal immigration to reduce the numbers and to avoid tariffs. By bringing those two things together and remembering, seeing this thing in the big picture with respect to economics and trade, Donald Trump is going to get a better than NAFTA agreement one way or the other. Should the USMCA be ratified? It should. Will it? We'll see. But more importantly, he's addressing what both parties in Congress see and refuse to acknowledge. Oh, well, we have so-and-so. I don't care what anybody says until legislation is passed and put on the president's desk. It doesn't matter. It's just rhetoric. Tariffs to deal with immigration. It's a marvelous outside-the-box idea. And it's going to break this logjam to some extent on immigration. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. Final segment of this first hour. I don't have a lot of time. I want to remind people of what Mitch McConnell had to say about the Merrick Garland appointment back in 2016.
This nomination ought to be made by the president we're in the process of electing this year.
And you are convinced, briefly, you are convinced that your Republican senators who are in tough races in November won't pay a political price for it, regardless of the history?
There's a lot of interest on both sides of this issue. The right of center world does not want this vacancy filled by this president. And even though, if you want to discuss the nominee just for a minute, even though Barack Obama calls him a moderate, he's opposed by the NRA. He's opposed by the National Federation of Independent Business, which had never taken a position on a Supreme Court nominee before. The New York Times said it would move the court dramatically to the left. But this is not about this particular judge. This is about who should make the appointment. We're in the process of picking a president, and that new president ought to make this appointment, which will affect the Supreme Court maybe for the next quarter of a century.
Speaking of a new president, if Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders were to win the presidency, is there any chance that Republicans would vote to confirm Merrick Garland during a lame duck session of Congress?
I can't imagine that a Republican majority Congress in a lame duck session after the American people have spoken would want to confirm a nominee opposed by the NRA, the NFIB, and the New York Times says would move the court dramatically to the left.
Senator,
this nomination ought to be made by the next president.
So just to put a button on this, are you ruling it out 100%?
Yes.
That's called doing what you're supposed to do when you have an advantage. You use it to push what you want to do. Be it in sports, be it in politics, be it in business, doesn't matter. No sense having an advantage and doing everything you have to do to get an advantage if you're not going to use it. Following up on that, this last week on the 29th of May, Mitch McConnell had these remarks with regard to whether or not what would happen if the next appointment came up during 2020.
The Supreme Court justices die next year.
We'd fill it. Yeah, the reason I started with the judges, as important as all these other things are that we're talking about, I mean, if you want to have a long-lasting, positive impact on the country, everything else changes. You know, I remember during the tax bill, there were people agonizing over whether one part of the tax bill was permanent or not. I said, look, the only way the tax bill is permanent depends upon the next election. What can't be undone is a lifetime appointment to a young man or woman who believes in the quaint notion that the job of judge is to follow the law. So that's the most important thing we've done for the country, which cannot be undone. I want you to know that I'm going to continue to look out for us and operate as effectively as I possibly can on every single thing that's important to us and try to give Kentucky an opportunity to punch above its weight, And I do that on a daily basis.
If you didn't hear the question, it was what would the Senate do if Supreme Court died in 2020? What would they do with the seat? They'd fill it. Why? Because, as Mr. McConnell explained, he believes what he is doing is best for the country, to have judges who will follow the law. And if he has an advantage, fair or unfair, and it is a fair advantage in this case, that allows him to do that in accordance with his conscience, having run for that position, having won running on that, then he intends to do what it is that he said he believes is important. Again, there's no sense in having an advantage if you're not going to use it. And you can call him cocaine, Midcon, whatever you want to. But as long as he's doing that for the American people, I'd move to Kentucky and vote for him. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Ron Edwards, and then we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
Cleveland could soon be the next city to no longer honor Christopher Columbus. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, in recent years, Cleveland has emerged from being an ugly, run-down former industrial powerhouse and is now a premier medical center with an exciting downtown and several neighborhoods, along with world-class museums and a plethora of renowned restaurants, attracting almost 20 million tourists annually from around the world. But unfortunately, my hometown has become stuck on stupid in the area of political correctness. The Cleveland City Council is contemplating no longer recognizing Columbus Day as a holiday, because Columbus has been labeled a racist murderer by those who control the government school system and also badmouth the founders of this nation. Cleveland City Council is leaning toward honoring Indigenous Peoples Day. Maybe they can honor the Iroquois Indian Confederacy, who almost wiped out the entire Seneca tribe. Just saying. Oh, wait, why not just call it a day of pandering? I'm Ron Edwards. It's the Ron Edwards Experience, Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on AmericaMatters.us, Saturdays at 6 p.m. Mountain on KYAH AM 540, Delta, Utah, and 12 a.m. Sundays on Talk America Radio Network.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, we're getting more celebrity pro-abortion silliness. So, as you know, the American people are turning against abortion. And this is not a new phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that's as old as Roe v. Wade itself. Almost as soon as Roe v. Wade was passed and it hit its peak, the American people fought back to the point where there are now fewer abortion clinics now than at any time since Roe v. Wade was passed. How is that happening? If you wouldn't know it by the media, you wouldn't think that with everything that's going on in the media and how much we're supposed to believe the women and trust women, that there is now only one legal abortion clinic in the state of Missouri, and its ability to operate was severely challenged within the last week. You would not know that there are several states where there are less than 5 abortion clinics within the state. Why is that? Is it because Planned Parenthood has poor political connections? That's not true. They get federal funding. The reason is because the American people don't want it, and they've made that clear through their state governments. Simple as that. Nevertheless, if you're in Hollywood, you are a big supporter of everything that is liberal and progressive. And so as several states, and the number is very large, more than 40% of states are really attacking abortion and making sure that they are standing up increasingly for the rights and specifically the life of the unborn child. And that doesn't sit well with Hollywood.
Hollywood is taking a stand against Georgia's new abortion law. At least 3 production companies have said they'll no longer film in the state, which offers filmmakers the best tax incentives in the country. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed a so-called fetal heartbeat measure Tuesday that effectively bans abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected, which is usually about 6 weeks into pregnancy. The law is scheduled to go into effect in 2020. After the signing, David Simon, who created both The Wire and The Deuce, tweeted, "I can't ask any female member of any film production with which I am involved to so marginalize themselves or compromise their inalienable authority over their own bodies." Georgia served as the backdrop for parts of Marvel's Black Panther, the Hunger Games series, Stranger Things, and Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, just to name a few. It's not just the tax breaks that are wooing companies. Others, like producers for AMC's The Walking Dead, were incentivized by local officials willing to do what's needed to get the perfect shot, even allowing production to take over an entire town. Entertainment companies have similarly pulled filming out of other states over controversial legislation. like North Carolina, which passed a bathroom bill in 2016 requiring people to use the restroom that matches the gender marked on their birth certificate. Part of the law has since been repealed, but it hasn't been overturned completely.
I want you to pay attention to the fact that Georgia offers the most liberal, and we use that term advisedly, tax advantage, tax breaks to the entertainment industry of any state. In other words, come here and don't pay taxes to film, to do your production. And that's how that among local officials will say, hey, whatever you got to do to get your shot, we're not only going to not tax you, we're going to give you the creative freedom to take over our entire space if you need to get what you need done. Now, there are states who don't have restrictive abortion laws. California, where Hollywood is located. So let me ask you this. You're willing to give up the tax breaks and not get your perfect shot just so innocent unborn children can be killed. That's more important to you than your work. It's more important to you that unborn children can be killed at any time for any reason at any point during a pregnancy than for you to do your production in the most cost-effective and least creatively hindered way imaginable. That's what you would have me believe. Okay. Now, they talked about Georgia, they talked about North Carolina, there are other states that didn't mention that. But the interesting thing about the Georgia heartbeat bill, which has of course been, vilified in the press, do you really know everything that's in it? A local Georgia affiliate back in March did this piece so that you would understand a little bit more about what the Georgia heartbeat bill is about. Remember, it doesn't go into effect until 2020.
The abortion bill is clearing yet another hurdle at the state capitol. Not only would it limit abortions to about 6 weeks after conception, the bill actually gives legal rights to unborn babies they don't have now. 11 Alive's Doug Richards found some other things you may not know about this measure.
The silent vigils outside the Capitol, the energetic crowds inside it. They illustrate the state's sharp divide on abortion and the insistence by Republicans in the Capitol on tightening abortion rights. The essence of the bill is this. Abortion is currently legal through 20 weeks gestation. This bill would dial that back to 6 weeks, when backers say a fetal heartbeat can be detected. Ed Setzler is the bill's sponsor.
I think as we follow science, we follow the dictates of common sense and practicality, I think we recognize that we do well to support the heartbeat as the threshold.
But the heartbeat bill has some other details, which would make some additional, not so subtle changes in state law. Here are 3 of them. The bill says an unborn child at any stage of development shall be included in state population.
Really, the definition of unborn child includes a fertilized egg. Jen
Jordan is a critic of the heartbeat bill and says it legally makes a person of any newly fertilized egg discovered during a home pregnancy test.
The pea on the stick bill, that's basically what it is.
It also says an unborn child at any stage of development shall qualify as a dependent minor under the federal tax code. That means a possible tax deduction for newly pregnant parents.
It does help expecting families and the cost of preparing to bring a bouncing baby into the nursery.
The bill also says that a woman can still legally have an abortion up to 20 weeks gestation if conception is the result of rape or incest. But in each case, the bill requires the pregnant woman to file an official police report alleging the offense of rape or incest in order to legally have the later term abortion.
There's not even any standard of proof required with it. It's just that you file a police report. So there doesn't have to be an investigation. There doesn't have to be a charge. Nothing like this. You just file a police report, and then you're able to get an abortion.
The sponsor of the heartbeat bill says he had to include the rape or incest exception in order to get enough support to pass the bill. The Senate could vote on it Friday.
So let's first of all deal with that exception that they put in to get support. Well, what about rape or incest? I'm like, okay, let's not forget that according to the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood, if you took rape, incest, plus abortions done to protect the health or life of the mother, that makes up less than 1.5% of all abortions in America. So the idea that you put that in there to get support is kind of like I'm putting in the exception. And when you say exception, you really mean exception. It happens less than 1.5% of the time. And if you break that down, it's less than 1% for each of those. So let's make sure we're clear about that. What about the changes? The idea that someone who is unborn is part of the population. Well, that's crazy. Why is it crazy? If you're calling them a child, if you're calling it a baby, why could it not be part of the population? It does exist. It is alive. Why would it not be a part of the population? Well, it hasn't developed enough yet. What difference does that make? So let me get this straight. You can rail all day long about the fact that the original Constitution did not count those in chattel slavery as a full person. And the reason for that, though you don't want to admit it, was simply to protect everyone from the ravages of those who favored slavery. But you have a problem with a law that says anyone who is conceived should be counted as part of the population. What's the problem with that? How does that hurt? Who does it hurt? Oh, the other thing, if you are pregnant, you can claim the unborn child as a dependent for tax purposes. Now, they said federal. It sounded like they said federal. I think you can do it for state. I don't know how they would impose that upon the feds. I don't know if they can actually impose that on the feds as law. I don't see how that would work. But even if it's doing it for state purposes, how does that harm anybody? Tell me what that does against. What does that do to negative to a woman, to a man, to a family? What is the harm that you would find a problem with that? And for the exception, if you're saying, well, you know what, we want to protect victims of crime, so rape and incest, we're fine. We'll say, okay, fine. But it can't just be you walking in and saying you were raped, therefore kill the child within me. You at least have to go tell law enforcement so that the crime can be addressed. Well, there's no element of proof. I'm like, what's your point? So what is it that you would have instead? Just abortion on demand for any reason, therefore we don't check on it? Or, you know what, if you say you're raped, if you say you're a victim of incest, such that another person should die, because that's all we're saying. If you want us to look the other way while you kill somebody, then demonstrate that the reason that they got here was the result of a crime. At least file a police report so that they can start the investigation. What they're afraid of is what the investigation might come back with. So that's the Georgia heartbeat bill. You can still do whatever you want up to 6 weeks. And if if you're a victim of rape or incest, you can go to 20 weeks. Where's the harm? Well, some women don't know they're pregnant. I guess what? If you are sexually active, maybe you need to monitor that. Well, that's asking a lot of women. Is it asking them a lot for them to keep up with their birth control, which they have to do on a daily basis? So what is hard about this, having them check whether or not they're pregnant once a week? What's the problem? You know what? With great power comes great responsibility. Let's move on. On the 22nd of May, there was a report that was filed regarding, again, Hollywood's boycott of Georgia, and this stuff just keeps going, and it gets funnier, and you'll know why I say it gets funnier after we get past this clip.
Georgia's new law banning abortion after a heartbeat is detected, sparking boycotts in Hollywood that could put Georgia's massive production business at risk. The state's up to 30% tax credits drew over 450 film and TV projects last year, driving over $4.5 billion in wages and a $9.5 billion economic impact, according to the Georgia's governor's office. Now, recent projects include Disney's Black Panther and Infinity War, AMC's The Walking Dead, and Netflix's Ozark. But now a number of Hollywood producers and stars say they won't work in the state with the new law. Just this week, a new Amazon show, as well as a Lionsgate movie starring Kristen Wiig, canceled shoots set to start in Georgia. Mark Duplass, Alyssa Milano, Ben Stiller, and Ron Howard among those pledging to boycott productions in Georgia. Now, it is complicated, though. The Motion Picture Association of America, representing the studios, as well as some other filmmakers, argue that taking work from the locals does not effectively fight the state's laws and just hurts workers. Jordan Peele and J.J. Abrams pledging to donate their fees from production in Georgia to fight that bill in court. And now a California lawmaker is trying to use Georgia's controversial law in order to help lure production back to California, introducing a bill to offer tax breaks to productions that relocate from states with restrictive abortion bans. Guys, back to you.
Can someone tell me why you actually need to boycott Georgia when you can just go back to California? I mean, Hollywood is in California. Why are you not filming in California? They have studios there. They have backlots. They have all this stuff. They have infrastructure like you wouldn't believe for film projects. Why are you? Oh, the money. Oh, okay. So you could kill all the kids you want in California. You still can. But the money was so much better outside the state that you left anyway. And now that you can't kill kids, now for some reason the money's not good enough? Is that the story? So how come you're not going back to I haven't heard anybody say, well, we're not going to film there. You know what I didn't hear? I didn't hear where they were going. We're not going to film in Georgia, so where are you going to film? And California hasn't kicked in those tax breaks yet. And to be honest, I don't know if they can afford to. So what's going on here? But here's the thing that is most amusing to me. This was on the Daily Wire. Sophie Turner vows to never work in anti-abortion states, and then she gets asked about where Game of Thrones was filmed. Interesting. Don't you find that interesting? Among those officially joining the boycott movement are Jessica Chastain and Sophie Turner, who are co-starring in the upcoming X-Men film Dark Phoenix. In an interview with Sky News, published Wednesday, Chastain and Turner announced that they both signed a letter along with dozens of their colleagues pledging to boycott pro-life states. Quote, there's a letter going around that I signed. I'm not going to work in any state that denies rights for women, for the LGBT community, for anyone, Chastain told Sky News. I'm not going to work in a state that discriminates. I signed it too, said Turner. I have yet to tell my agents I signed it. They're going to be like, what? You can't work in these states? Yeah, I can't work in these states. Turner was then asked about her willingness to work for years on Game of Thrones, most of which was filmed in Northern Ireland, where women can face life in jail for aborting their pregnancy. Turner didn't try to reconcile that conflict. Instead, she just expressed relief that the show is over. There was a lot of work of Game of Thrones there, so luckily we're moving on. Excuse me? Do you now know why I can't take anybody who plays a person that's not themselves in order to make a living? I can't take them seriously, not on matters of import. You're a hypocrite. In this case, Sophie Turner is just a flat-out joke. I can't work where people are denied their rights. You were in Northern Ireland where they would do more to women and the doctors, as a matter of fact. They could all go to jail for life for killing an unborn child, and you worked on that set for years. Years. But all of a sudden, because a letter's going around, now all of a sudden you got religion and you can't work. Wow. This is foolishness. This is the same group of people who tried to tell you that Hillary was the best president, that tried to tell the Electoral College not to vote for the people, for the candidate that the voters in their states had chosen. This is them. If you're listening to them, there's something wrong with you. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us, also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let me just put this out there. The progressive left is godless. And to the point where there is great animus toward God in the progressive left. What am I talking about? Well, recently the World Health Organization decided to redefine gender nonconformity, gender dysphoria, transgenderism as something different than what it had been characterized as up to that point, which is a mental disorder. Instead of saying there's something wrong with you that we need to help you with, they have now said the problem simply rests with the rest of society who does not want to accept what this off person has decided to put forward. You really need to understand how deep this goes. So first, let's talk about what the World Health Organization did. World Health Organization, of course, also has ties or relationships to the United Nations, so you already know there's no God there. But this is a bit of what they have come up with.
In a historic breakthrough for non-binary and transgender folks of all ages, the World Health Organization has ended the practice of classifying gender nonconformity as a mental disorder. A Human Rights Watch representative celebrated the United Nations Health Agency's decision, saying it will have a liberating effect on transgender people worldwide. HuffPost reports the updated version of the WHO's International Classification of Diseases, ICD-11, has changed gender identity disorder to gender incongruence, which is more generally known as gender dysphoria and is now included in the chapter regarding sexual health. The change was announced last summer, but a resolution to amend the health guidelines was officially approved last Saturday.
I found that a lot of people today are unaware that until the 1970s, and as a result of a massive campaign pushback from the homosexual community, they did not realize that homosexuality was considered a treatable mental disorder. Nothing changed about homosexuality. Something changed about the American Psychiatric Association that had characterized it. They decided they didn't want to deal with it. Why did they decide they didn't want to deal with it as a mental disorder? Because they don't understand the brain. They don't understand certain things. And instead of saying, this is God's business. I didn't make you. Someone else made you. They made you a certain way, and that has worked from time immemorial. And now all of a sudden you, who aren't even relevant to be a pimple on the elephant's butt of the world, have decided that what works for everybody can't work for you. That's crazy. But that's exactly what this whole thing comes down to. I don't want to be called crazy. Stop calling me crazy. Okay, well, do you understand why we're calling you crazy? Well, why are you calling me crazy? You're a man, and you want to have sex with other men, and your way of having sex is not only unnatural, but leads to diseases and cannot lead to another generation. There's something wrong with you. Or you're a woman and you don't want to have sex with women. You don't want to be in a relationship with women, with men. You want to be in a relationship with women, where again, the type of intercourse you can have is not natural. It's not healthy and cannot lead to a next generation. There's something wrong with you. You want to reject that out of hand and say, well, the problem is the rest of the world. Well, let's flip it around. If everybody thought like you guys think, then humanity would be done in maybe 1 or 2 generations. And I don't know, maybe that's what you really want. It would be better if you just simply acknowledge that. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me say this about homosexuality. I don't care who's homosexual. I don't care that you practice homosexuality. I really don't care what you think about homosexuality. What I care about is what you believe I need to think about homosexuality. I'm not changing my mind about it because I agree with the maker of all mankind. You have chosen something that is wrong. But guess what? You're no different than the person who has chosen that they should never tell the truth. You're no different than the person who has decided that if they don't like someone, they should kill them. You're no different from the person who has decided that if they want something that does not belong to them, they should steal it. You're no different from that. But the idea that I should change my mind about what you do is ridiculous. It's just that simple. It's ridiculous. If you want to be a homosexual, if you want to be a lesbian, if you want to be bisexual, which is homosexual, that's your business. But trying to tell me that it's something other than what it is, that's where the problem comes in. Do I have homosexual acquaintances? I do. Do I talk to them about their homosexuality? I don't. Why? Because they're not ready for that conversation with me. And say, well, maybe they might change your mind. I say they can't change my mind. The problem is, before they're willing to change their mind, there's too many things that they have to give up because they've painted themselves into a corner. The world is against them. The world's not against me. But I digress. So that's what the World Health Organization had to say. Now, if you think it's just at the international level where there's UN folks who don't like God, don't like the United States, don't like anything that you stand for, let me get you to slow your roll on that. This was a video produced by Children's Hospital of Orange County in California back in July of 2017. And this is going to give you a little bit more of an idea of how deep the roots for this, I'll just call it what it is, this foolishness, how far it goes on transgenderism and what people are supposed to, quote unquote, think about it.
Hi, my name is Mark Daniels, and I'm a pediatric endocrinologist at Chalk Children's Hospital. I'm the division chief, and I'm overseeing a new program called Gender, Puberty, and Sex Development Program at Chalk. Gender is the sense of self, of who one is in the world that we live in. And so gender really is not defined by what you look like or what your body looks like. It's who you are inside. Gender dysphoria is the sense that there is some distress or stress related to the fact that how you see yourself is not how the rest of the world sees you. And that can lead to anxiety and depression. So the dysphoria is when your understanding of who you are does not match with what the rest of the world sees. Sometimes people do not feel that they are the same gender as what their sex at birth was. So those people can generally be considered transgender if they are considering themselves the opposite gender of what they were born, or gender nonconforming, which just means they're not meeting society's understanding and norms of what gender is. When someone is transgender, oftentimes the first question people ask is why? And the answer is we really don't know. It can be a mix of many different things, including genetics and culture, environment, but in truth we don't have any test that we can do, such as a blood test or an x-ray. Many parents ask, how would I know if my child has a gender issue or is gender nonconforming? And the real answer is listening. The real answer is trying to understand when a child is expressing something, what that may mean to that child. So some children will, at a very early age, as soon as they can talk, will tell you that they're being told that they're a girl when they're a boy, or they feel like a boy, or vice versa. They're actually a boy, but everybody is calling them a girl or making them wear dresses. And this is actually oftentimes very distressing to a child. So that would be one of the first indicators to some families. Some kids are very private in that, and they can make it until adolescent or even adulthood without anybody knowing. So sometimes there's no way for a parent to know this. However, if a parent is clued in and gives a child a sense of safety and space to express themselves, children will often be able to give you hints and clues and maybe sometimes direct information that they don't feel like they're treated in the right gender for themselves. If a parent or a guardian starts wondering if their child has a gender nonconformity or is transgendered, the first thing they should do is try to understand where their child is coming from. I do want to say that this is not easy on anyone. It's not easy on the children. It's not easy on the parents, not easy on the siblings. It's something that we as a society are starting to understand more and more about, but is still very different than what our classic society has accepted. Once there is starting to be more information and ideas that there is a gender nonconformity or someone who is not following our typical gender ideas, then the family should really reach out to a medical professional like their pediatrician or to a counselor. The idea there is not to try to change the idea of the child or the mind of the child, that we can fix that issue, but really to offer a sense of safety and support to really be able to explore this a little further. So right now, our goal here at Chalk is to offer a comprehensive approach to children with gender issues and other issues. This will include medical care, adolescent medical care, therapy, counseling, and access to resources. Our goal here is to offer gender-affirming therapy. We want children and adolescents to actually feel comfortable in expressing who they feel they are, not what the world thinks they should be.
Yeah. This be that bovine male excrement that I was telling y'all about. This is craziness. Gender is who you are inside. Please explain to me why it is when they take the child out of the womb and get it to start crying, the first thing they tell you is whether or not it's a boy or a girl. They don't look inside the child. They don't explore its feelings. They basically take a look, and you know what? The plumbing tells you the tale. All of a sudden, here in the 21st century, we have become so enlightened that gender is something other than what it is. Well, you know, not everybody feels that way. It doesn't matter. Not everybody feels that lying is wrong. Not everybody feels that killing is wrong. Not everybody feels that stealing is wrong. It doesn't matter how you feel. It matters what is. If you are born with a penis, you are a male. If you are born with a vagina, you are a female. Now, you can actually be non-binary if you are born with both. There are medical hermaphrodites. They tend to have some interesting combination or lack thereof of what we consider normal genitalia. Now, if you end up being one of those from a medical standpoint, then you can claim non-binary status. Absent that, and they are quite rare, we know what you are from the moment you come from the womb. Doesn't matter. Nobody asked you your opinion. This is the interesting thing to me. How is it that you can emerge from the womb without having any input on being conceived, any input on when you would be born, to whom you would be born, in what time era you would be born, but all of a sudden you get to decide what you really, you don't even get to name yourself, but you get to decide whether or not you're, come on. This is crazy. What you have to understand is the doctors who don't know and don't want to deal with God are going to try to find a way to make society deal with you as though now you are someone special and that the rest of us just don't understand how special you are. No, we understand that something's wrong with you, and it's in our best interest and yours to correct it to the best of our ability. Now, what that means, that's a good question. Because if you don't want to conform, no one can make you conform. It really comes down to this. If you don't want to be what you were born to be, that's your business. But trying to tell somebody that your choice is normal is wrong. It's just your choice. Now, I'm going to play this last clip. This was interesting. This was back in February on Tucker Carlson's program. A lesbian came in, and she had been put off of one of those alphabet soup committees because as a lesbian she spoke out against the issue of transgender, and the things that she has to say are interesting indeed.
Julie Beck joins us now on set. Julie, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So you said something that I think many people would in their hearts think is obvious, but very few people are willing to say out loud. You said it knowing you would likely be punished for saying it, but you said it anyway. Why did you do that?
I believe in the truth. I believe that people should have these conversations and say things that matter without fear of punishment.
You are old-fashioned. Why do you think, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm grateful that you have that attitude, but why do you think it was important to say this specifically?
Well, when we get down to it, women and girls all share a biological reality. We are all female. But if any male person can call himself a woman or legally identify as female, then predatory men will do so in order to gain access to women's single-sex spaces, and this puts every woman and girl at risk.
That's from the beginning. I don't weigh in on this often because sexual politics is a morass, and it's not worth it, to be totally honest with you. But I have enough daughters that I care, and my instinct has always been this change in our society, which we never debated, the terms have never been clarified, is not going to be good for girls in the long run. Do you share that concern?
I definitely do agree. Like I said, this puts every woman and girl at risk of male violence, and this is already happening in many states. In many states, men can legally identify themselves as female and gain access to women's single-sex spaces. And sports is just one institution where men are taking titles, scholarships, and this is a problem.
So it seems like a real problem. Why wouldn't women's groups who exist to carry the banner for women raise the alarm about this?
Women have been speaking out about this for decades, but we have been effectively silenced. Many women, like myself, have been pushed out of spaces that we built, spaces that are intended to include us, simply because we acknowledge biological reality.
Do you think, you're lesbian, you were in the same acronym as a bunch of other groups, including people who are transgendered. Do you think that makes it more difficult for you to make this argument? I mean, it seems like this has been so politicized that you're expected to have a certain set of views that maybe you don't have.
I see where you're coming from. I would like to make a distinction here. The letters in the acronym share not much. The L, G, and B are based on sexualities. They're based on sex, biological realities.
Yes.
But the T is based on gender identity, which is not based in biological reality. In fact, I would argue that it's opposed to biological reality. The LGB is very different from the T, and I don't think it's fair to lump us all into the same acronym.
Do you find it astounding that it is considered an act of bravery to defend biology?
I wouldn't say so myself, but I guess that's where we are right now, and I hope more women stand up.
But last question, because I can't remember. What did they say to you? You were thrown off this commission. You were punished for saying this out loud. What was the rationale for it?
Frankly, there was no case made. My accuser said that they didn't have to make a case. One of the members of my committee argued that sex was a thing of the past. He said, frankly, science had progressed so far that sex was unimportant. I argued the opposite.
Julie Beck, at a time like this, everyone thinks, I would say what I really think, but most people are afraid to, and you're not. And I'm definitely standing in admiration of that. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Did you catch that? Sex is passé. Sex is unimportant. But the important thing I got from that is the recognition, even from someone who has made the immoral choice to be lesbian. She has not made the ridiculous choice of casting aside the importance of gender, and that gender is a biological fact. It is not a matter of what you feel inside. It is a matter of biology. What you choose to do with your biology, that's a totally different discussion. And notice what she said. The T, I'm sorry, it's got nothing to do, it doesn't belong in this discussion. The L, the G, and the B, but the T, totally different animal. And it is, because it is a mental disorder. Homosexuality and lesbianism are also considered disorders. And in my mind, I still think that they are. And we have definitely evidence of people coming out of the lifestyle. But you know what? If you don't accept the biology of what you are, and you base your lifestyle in sexual thinking on something that, sex is unimportant, sex is passé, science has progressed. Science hasn't progressed. Science has not progressed beyond male and female. Science has not even caught up to everything that is unique and special and profound about male and female. They're just trying to bypass it because there's a small minority that doesn't wish to be what God made them. You are living in an age where people on the left, calling themselves very educated and considering themselves highly intelligent, much more intelligent than you or I, where they want to redefine everything about society so that you might be manipulated into what someone else thinks, even though you know it is wrong. This is what you're dealing with now. The World Health Organization has now decided to redefine what it knew was mental disorder into something else. Same thing happened with homosexuality back in the 70s. It's going to happen now sooner or later. Other sexual deviances, pedophilia, not least among them because it's teed up right now, is going to be called just another life choice. And the only way to deal with that, you do not have an argument that works against that without embracing the divine. That there is a maker, that he had a design, and how you come out on either end of it from the womb is the only word that ever is going to be given about what you are. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin' here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Does the Jussie Smollett case matter? I think it does. Let me tell you why. Before I do that, let me just go ahead and give you a little background. Jussie Smollett is the black homosexual actor on the show Empire who, because he was unsatisfied with what he was getting paid, went on and staged a racist and homophobic attack against himself in order to try to get more money for his acting role. He was exposed as a liar. He ended up getting charged with 16 felony counts of disorderly conduct for lying to the police. He did not get the raise he wanted. Matter of fact, his time on the show got cut to the point he was written out of the show. The show itself is now circling the bowl. All that is good stuff. But that's not the reason the case matters. The case matters now because the records that were sealed showing just how dirty and devious he was, and also what was going on with the prosecutor's office that thought 16 felony charges did not deserve prosecution or jail time. That's being looked at now. Why does that matter? Because the state's attorney is a black female. Because black girl magic is what got Jussie Smollett a walk. Because black females are the most homosexual supportive group in these United States, it seems. They don't support law-abiding heterosexual black men, but they have a thing for homosexuals. And Kim Foxx is no different. Kim Foxx in Chicago is no different. She's been called out by the police, particularly over this case, and others where people who had shot police, even killed police, were not adequately prosecuted by her office. She's not alone. In Boston, Rachel Rollins is came into office in Boston and said she's not going to prosecute certain cases. She put out a whole list of cases that she's not going to prosecute. She's just not going to touch them. property cases. So if somebody breaks into your business or home, that's too bad. So what else do we have? We had Kelly Hodge in Philadelphia. You have Darcel Clark in the Bronx. This is not an isolated incident, and what these females all have in common, they're black, they're leftist, and they're anti-police. Period. Oh, and let's not leave out the young lady, the state's attorney for Baltimore, who decided she was going to charge 6 cops in the death of Freddie Gray and couldn't get anybody convicted of so much as jaywalking. But finally, on something as indiscriminate as this is nothing special, but the process was so outlandish that a special prosecutor may be in place to find out what's going on in the state's attorney's office in Chicago. If that happens, then Black Girl Magic gets shut down in Chicago. Black Girl Magic gets shut down in Chicago, and in almost every one of these other places, the Bronx, Boston, Philadelphia, these black women have a problem with police. They have a problem with the police. And if the first domino in Chicago falls, then you can see Black Girl Magic being rolled up. Does that mean that these women are going to be removed? No, not necessarily. It means they may have to actually uphold the law as opposed to uphold their ideology. Because the people of those jurisdictions aren't really concerned about their ideology as much as they are being safe and secure in their own homes and businesses. And so that, and only that, is the reason why the Jussie Smollett case matters. Remember this is something that I found very interesting. On the 31st of May, Fox News put out a report that indicated that there is still a push for a special prosecutor, and this is something that makes someone like Ms. Fox very uncomfortable, even though she's not going to say that it does.
We're learning new details about the Jussie Smollett case. Police in Chicago now releasing hundreds of new documents. Meanwhile, a retired judge who wants a special prosecutor to investigate why the charges were dropped anyway heads back to court moments from now. Ellison Barber's at court to give us a preview of what's happening there, where the judge will appear. Ellison, what do you have?
Hey, Bill, if you look behind me right here, you can see the yellow jacket. That is the retired judge, Sheila O'Brien, walking into court here right now. Some court documents have been unsealed, but that retired judge, Judge O'Brien, she says it is not enough. Sheila O'Brien wants a special counsel to look into the dismissal of charges related to Jussie Smollett's alleged staging of a hate crime. She wanted a judge from outside of the county to make the decision, and she wanted Cook County's state's attorney, Kim Fox, to testify. A judge had previously said no to those requests. Here's Judge O'Brien speaking last week.
The handling of the Jussie Smollett case by this state's attorney has been a disaster. I hope that the law is obeyed, and the law of appointing a special prosecutor has not been obeyed. Interestingly, if you look at that law, it says the court, on the court's own motion, can do this. The court can do this on their own motion.
Earlier I said special counsel, I meant special prosecutor, which you heard her say there, but the push for a special prosecutor and the latest release of police documents, all of it adding more twists and turns in a case that was never straightforward. Now it seems Chicago police knew Cook County prosecutors were working on a deal with Smollett weeks before Smollett's charges were officially dropped. In the nearly 500 pages of official documents released by the Chicago Police Department yesterday, it says after a grand jury indicted Smollett, a Cook County prosecutor told detectives, and I'm quoting here, She felt the case would be settled with Smollett paying the city of Chicago $10,000 in restitution and doing community service. That is what happened. The police superintendent and then Mayor Rahm Emanuel were outraged about that. A spokesperson for the Chicago Police Department told Fox News this, quote, the detectives were not aware that the case was going to be handled in the manner that it was, pointing out, quote, the detective writes that the case will be closed through arrest and prosecution. An official with the Chicago Police Department tells me that prosecutors indicated to detectives that Smollett would pay restitution and do community service in exchange for some sort of admission of guilt. That did not happen. That official says that detectives were under the impression that the charges would still be prosecuted, not dropped. Jesse Smollett, of course, said he was innocent then, and he maintains he is innocent today. Bill?
Thank you, Ellison Barber, Cook County Courthouse there. Thank you.
So the law was not followed with regard to a special prosecutor in Chicago. In the Bronx, Darcel Clark, the black female district attorney there, the NYPD Sergeants Union head is called for her resignation back in February of 2018 because of her corruption. Boston's first black district attorney. Now, these are all elected officials. Don't get me wrong. I understand that. But the thing is, after you win the election, you do have to uphold the law, and they're not doing that. Kim Foxx did not uphold the law. Kelly Hodge in Philadelphia, don't know that she's upholding the law. Boston's first black DA, which is Rachel Rollins, she said she was not going to prosecute certain crimes. If Jesse Smollett's case results in a special prosecutor tearing apart Kim Foxx's handling, then the days of handling of the Jesse Smollett case, then the days of black girl magic in the American legal system would be coming to an end, which would be good news for heterosexual black men everywhere. Law-abiding heterosexual black men everywhere are benefited when black girl magic does not appear. And don't forget, Marilyn, whatever her name was, Cosby, or no, not Cosby. Oh, sorry about that. But the state's attorney in Baltimore, who tried 6 cops for Freddie Gray's death and couldn't even get a jaywalking conviction. When you start taking these people and their leftist ideology and their homosexual support out of the legal system, then everybody does better. But tell me who especially does better: law-abiding heterosexual black men. That is why this case matters, because it could mean the fall of the first one, and this would be Kim Foxx in Chicago. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. And until we are able to be with you again, hopefully next week, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.